Hello, true creatives, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Andrew Binns. He is the co-founder of ChangeLogic, an advisory service firm for CEOs and corporations around innovation. And he's also the author of the book, The Corporate Explorer, How Corporations Can Beat Startups at the Innovation Game. Now, if you've been around the innovation sphere as long as I have, you know how controversial that statement can be. So I'm
What
really
a crazy
looking
thing
forward
to put on our book, really.
Absolutely. So, Andrew, with no further ado, it's wonderful having you here today.
Thank you very much, Nick. I really appreciate it. And I love the name of your podcast, Ideas to Value. I think this is right in the space of our book and its controversial subtitle.
Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. So, Andrew, for people who don't know about you or ChangeLogic and the work that you do,
Sure.
could you just give us a very brief background as to where you got started and how you got to where you are now?
Delighted. Yeah, I got started on this really at IBM. I was at McKinsey in the late 90s. That's a long time ago. And I worked on some growth and innovation projects there, and it was certainly one of my core areas of interest. But then when I moved to IBM, I got the chance to work on what IBM called its emerging business opportunities, which was how around 2000 they were creating these new businesses, and some of them grew to be more than $1 billion of revenue. And we worked there with two business school professors, Mike Tushman from the Harvard Business School, Charles O'Reilly from Stanford, and they're now my partners at ChangeLogic and my co-authors in the book Corporate Explorer.
So, tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so we've made fun of the subtitle, and it was a debate. One of my co-authors was like, "Well, we can't say that, Andy. How corporations beat startups at the innovation game," and you'll notice it doesn't say beat them every time, or even necessarily have a batting average of over 500, but it says we beat that they do beat, and they do. There are plenty of examples of where corporations are able to leverage their assets in order to get ahead of disruption and beat the market. They're just not the same, household name or startling news, right? Big company innovates again just doesn't make the headlines in the same way as the latest Elon Musk idea, right? So there is some of this which is hiding in plain sight, right? And in the book, what we wanted to do was to give that more sunlight. But in particular, we wanted to highlight the stories of the individuals who really lead these new businesses, because one of the things that we observe from our work is that there often is somebody at the center of it. We call it the corporate explorer. In a venture-backed startup, of course, it's the entrepreneur. And there's some similarities and there's some really big differences. And we wanted to kind of really take the lid off those differences, understand what it takes to be successful at this, because we know that many people aren't, that many people struggle. So if we can draw some lessons from those that are successful, that seemed worth doing.
So I'm really looking forward to getting into some of those stories, some of those case studies. But before we get into the reasons why corporations can beat startups, why do you think this is a statement that needs to be so explicitly sort of controversial? What has developed this mythos around corporates not being able to innovate and instead small nimble organizations being the only place that are innovating successfully?
Yeah, well, I think it's that maddening reality of fact, really, is that it is hard, and my colleague Mike Tushman has for 25 years started his classes at Harvard with a chart which is a whole row of company logos. And the question above it is, what do these companies have in common? And it's Blockbuster, Nokia, Kodak, on and on and on. And so we know that this question of disruption is real. And that in most of those instances, they either have the technology in the way that Nokia or Kodak or Polaroid did, or they have the opportunity to acquire it like a Blockbuster did, right? And so there's something going on with these stories of disruption which have to do not with the degree of insight that they have or the strategies, but actually to do with the organizations. And so that is definitely why this makes it hard. And the experience of individuals who live in a highly constrained, structured corporate environment and then go to a startup, there's freedom, there's opportunity. It doesn't necessarily mean they succeed. And so that's part of the paradox of this. So there's a lot of validity in this situation, and it can be hard. And in the book we talk a lot about what we call the silent killers of exploration. And one of the things that a successful corporate explorer or a wannabe successful corporate explorer needs to do is take account of why this is hard and understand that and build a plan to take it on, not only to be really great at innovating, but also to accept that they have to lead change.
I think one thing I always come up against is when talking with people about innovation, inevitably there's a lot of biases that are working against corporates in the mind of people. There's so much appeal to this idea of the young, scrappy, lone genius who's the founder of a company and who's taking on the large existing companies. And so when we think of examples of innovators, it is usually people who are front and center in the world right now, who have done things as an individual, like Elon Musk, who's known as the founder of something, or Steve Jobs, who is the founder of something. But what we always forget is the millions of stories of startups and small companies out there that tried to do something successful and who didn't succeed and who didn't manage to innovate and show value to companies and the consumers.
Yeah, there's a real high failure rate on the startup side for sure, and the odds, I actually can't remember, but the odds of becoming a unicorn are infinitesimally small. And this actually becomes a real problem for corporations as well, right? Because some of the efforts to create new businesses inside existing corporations try to follow the startup model, right? And really I don't think there are good data that works. Firstly, I think it leads you down a path of creating a lot of ideas rather than turning them to value, right? And it kind of misunderstands the advantages that corporations have. And so I think you're right to call this a sort of a mythos, a mythology around the startup garage that I think corporations too easily led into.
So let's go into the main themes and ideas in your book. You're saying that teams and companies and probably individuals and leaders within existing companies do have the ability to innovate. And sometimes, I would assume, because of the resources behind them, out-innovate younger, scrappier companies.
Exactly. Yeah. And, so if you look at, say, some of the most successful ones in our book, take, for instance, LexisNexis Risk Solutions, right? LexisNexis around 2000 was a 30-year-old company that had developed into a highly profitable, growing business that served primarily lawyers and others who needed news information. They sort of had two parts of their business. A lot of it was codifying public records information. And along comes one of their middle managers, a man called Jim Peck, and he says, hey, there are some new technologies out there that link data together. If we took our public records data and used some of those technology, we could create a wholly new business where people could gain insights from pulling all these data together. And, we now call that big data or data analytics, right? But he was in 2000, and now 2022, that business is $2.5 billion of revenue and larger than the original business, right? And so, Jim was was this corporate explorer, the person who was shining a light on the area of opportunity. But he was also mobilizing a sort of a network in the company. He didn't do this on his own. You know, he really, there's dozens of people who see themselves as having made that business successful, have made Jim successful at it. The other thing I think he did really well is he leveraged the assets of the firm, the brand. He leveraged those public records data, he leveraged the customer base they had, but he also leveraged the balance sheet and managed to get some acquisitions to fill out the proposition, right? Because innovation and M&A sometimes live in two separate camps. You know, I have clients where the corporate strategy team have innovation and they have M&A and they never talk to each other. You know, it's like, guys, come on, this is how you scale. You build, buy, leverage, partner to have the assets that you need to make this happen. And so that's part of this story of doing it well, I think.
So what are the types of capabilities that you need in a corporate in order to be able to innovate? And maybe even just while I'm thinking about it, when you're talking about innovating, what are you talking about? Because different people and different teams have different ambitions when it comes to defining something as innovative or not.
Yes. I think that's right. I mean, we're interested primarily in the more disruptive, more radical, larger scale innovations, building new businesses. And you know, there is absolutely nothing wrong with incremental improvement innovation. And I think in the world of digital transformation, that line is a little bit more blurry than it used to be, right? So trying to go down an incremental route, optimizing your current business model may not always be the smartest way. And some of these corporate explorers are not only building new businesses, they're actually building new capabilities, right? They're building back-end payments systems so that they can move from a B2B to a more B2C type model. They are learning about digital marketing channels, whatever it might be. So that there's the distinction between the more disruptive or radical innovation and the incremental is a little bit, I think, blurry nowadays. But we're definitely on the more radical side when we talk about this. How do you build a new business, new capability in a firm?
And when you're talking about exploring, quite often that's taken, when we talk about exploring, very much in line with the ambidextrous ideas set forward by Steve Blank and many others, that you've got one team which focuses on exploring and one team which focuses on exploiting. So how do you actually set up these capabilities? Coming back to the question, what does a company need in order to actually execute this innovation?
I think you're absolutely right. You know, Steve wrote a forward to my colleague's other book, Lead and Disrupt, and Lead and Disrupt is all about the ambidextrous organization, which Mike and Charles are sort of the most prominent authors of, going back to 2003 when they wrote the Harvard Business Review article, The Ambidextrous Organization. And Steve, in his forward to this book, says that this is a revolutionary concept, right? And it's like, it's really a big word to use, right? But what he means is that this notion that there's just one business that you're in, you've got to drop. You've got to, if you're running a business, you've got to understand that there are not just two, by the way, core and explore. There's folks talk about dual transformation, dual nonsense. It is multiple. You're dealing with a capability that can be optimizing a business that's mature, creating experiments that are immature and should be very small, and you've got ones which are starting to scale, right? It's much more of a portfolio thought, and it takes real sort of leadership dexterity, but it also takes some sort of some vigor from these corporate explorers, right? So the way that I think about it is that there are three disciplines of innovation. There's ideation, incubation, and scaling, right? Corporations gets far too wrapped around ideation, right? Lots of ideas. Let's generate, razzmatazz around the ideas, and this generates an innovation zoo. Right? Lots and lots of possibilities, lots of ideas that get a little bit of funding, nothing goes anywhere. Incubation is that practice of business experimentation. And I think Steve in particular is somebody who really taught us that discipline, right? And then scaling, less well understood, as I talked about with the LexisNexis story, one that involves building the customer access, the capabilities and the capacity in order to scale. And you've got to think about how you build, buy, leverage that to get what you need. The thing about these things, Nick, is that they're knowable, right? We can learn how to do these things well. They're sort of can be documented, they can be understood. The harder side of it is managing the change. And this is where the human being enters the story, and why the corporate explorer, has something special to offer to help companies be successful.
So obviously not asking you to spill all your secret sauce at the same time, but what is this special thing that the corporate explorer brings?
So a few things. First up, I think, is a scale of ambition. Right? If you propose ideas that are just incrementally better, this is not on the scale of the opportunity or the threat of disruption that's out there, and it's not what's on a senior team's agenda for the most part. So you need to have a scale of ambition that is equal to the threat or the opportunity. Let me give you an example of this. In Hungary, at the insurance company Unica. Right? Unica operates Central and Eastern Europe. It's got about 20 million customers, 6 billion of revenue. And Christian Kurtish is running their relatively small Hungarian business. And it's just been through a turnaround, this business unit. And Christian says, hey, I'm dissatisfied with the way insurance functions today. We're so concerned about administering policies, catching our customers out at theft, and all of these kinds of things. And we've lost sight of what insurance is really about, which is risk-sharing communities. And he sort of develops this analysis and starts to propose, well, what if we created a digital business that was based more around communities? We'll talk more about what that is. But the point is, he then, when he gets his opportunity in front of the CEO and management board, he doesn't suggest, oh, we could sell slightly more auto insurance policies if we use this idea a little bit. What he does is he says, look, this is fundamentally different. He shows a chart with a tower block with thousands of people in them at a big expense cost, and says, these are all the people administering policies in your current business. I only need 2 people to do this, and I could serve the same number of customers because it's much more scalable. And the way that he presented it, the scale of the ambition that he has, actually got the attention of the CEO, who said, this is like putting a hand grenade under our business, and unless we do it, somebody else will. So scale of ambition is pretty key. And then you've got to have a great story and an image, and that's, I think, one of the things that then Christian has in that example. And the third thing, Nick, is you need a social capital. Right. And so this, again, is a place where I feel we run counter to some of the sort of standard thinking, which is that many companies, when they face this opportunity, they will go look for, how can we find somebody like Nick who understands innovation and bring them into our company to lead this for us. The trouble is, Nick knows nobody. He has no chits to call on. He has no knowledge of the history of the business or where the bodies are buried. And therefore, the only thing the rest of the business is going to do is isolate, exclude, and ultimately reject, right? One of the corporate explorers who didn't succeed that we spoke to in the book said, it was like, paddling a canoe up the Amazon with a butter knife, right? It just simply impossible, because nobody wanted to help me. They all knew I would fail, and they were going to make sure that was the case. And so if you've got you need to use an insider, strong social capital, and then they need to be very strategic about how they build a social network around the idea. Where are the allies? Where are the advocates? People who can speak up for you when things are difficult. And so it's that sort of building the social network around the idea, which is often what demonstrates success.
I wrote quite a popular article a couple of months ago around the different types of corporate antibodies. And as you were describing that, several examples of corporate antibodies came up, either people who just are apathetic to the idea, but quite often when you come to the level of decision makers who are going to either allow a project to go forward or not, if you come in completely foreign to them and they have any sort of feeling of, but I know this won't work because someone tried it before, or actually I was involved in it before. Someone had the idea and it didn't go anywhere. So if you now try it and you actually are successful, it makes me look bad because I wasn't able to do it.
Exactly.
So
Yes.
there's so many.
Good.
The stakeholder management is so vitally important because you can take that same foe and turn them into an ally if
Yeah.
you can make them feel that they will actually benefit from the success of an idea
Yeah.
rather
Yeah.
than feeling like that ship has sailed in the past.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Because the reality is in corporations, and think of corporations just as large social groups, right? And in a large social group, the last thing you want to do is look bad, lose face, and be embarrassed. And I think Corporate Explorer is a teacher, and one of the things they're teaching is the discipline of experimentation, right? Is and you need to have your sort of angel on board with you early so that they get what the experiment's about, and even and that they feel excited that a problem they previously thought couldn't be solved, that they were involved in solving it. And I think and you're right, most innovations have a long history in a company, right? And so there are no new ideas. This is one of the things about ideation. Most of the successful ideas have some history that they've tried before and failed, or whatever. It's not the case that it's some blinding insight that comes from a hackathon or something like that.
I really like the fact that you just mentioned having spoken to a corporate explorer who tried but failed, because it's these stories and case studies that
Yes.
the more I learn, the more you can give people as many facts as you want, but people remember stories. So why
Yes.
don't we end on maybe two more stories? Maybe one story that you have as a case study of how things didn't go as they should have, or an example of what not to do, and then maybe one example of an unexpected large company that surprisingly was able to innovate and dramatically change itself.
Sure. Sure. So I think the first one of the struggle, is going to be the example of Havas, which is a French advertising agency, and they made a determined move about 10 years ago into using crowdsourced creatives to change their model. And they gave the job to this man John Windsor, an outsider, and this unit, Victors and Spoils, was going to create this crowdsourced model. Strong CEO support. Let me tell you, this story is about, and I could name other stories. I can give you Bill Rue at GE, the GE Predex business, right? Strong CEO support, or other examples. So the failure cases often check the list of all of the things that we think are necessary, and they are necessary, they are important, but they don't work. And what gets John Windsor is the antibodies of the old business, and that's because he's challenging their professional identity, their professional competence. This is one of those silent killers. It's a big one. It takes care of many innovations, and basically his crowdsource idea is cheaper and better, but it threatens these creative teams who've worked in advertising all these years. And they say literally, could it work? Maybe. Could 100 monkeys write Hamlet? This is literally the quote, right? So the silent killers of professional competence kills off that idea, and CEO resigns and so on. The example that I've worked with over a number of years that I find really surprising is Analog Devices. And the reason I find it surprising is because Analog Devices is a semiconductor company, now $90 billion market cap, a semiconductor company. And when I started working with it, it was substantially smaller. And over the last 9 or 10 years, the CEO, Vince Roche, has both acquired assets, but he's also built new assets. And he's managed to have them continue to be great at circuits. And anybody who's worked in a semiconductor company, this is a different world, right? It is really detailed and operational, and it's its own language and its own sort of way of doing things. But they've managed to take this way that I've seen in other semiconductor companies, and they've built onto it new assets. They have cloud connected services linked to their semiconductors that provide predictive data on when someone's going to have a congestive heart attack, right? Which is in trial at Mayo Clinic. They have a whole business model around putting sensors on motors and linking it to the cloud so that you can run predictive analytics around whether the machine is going to break, right? Which is itself something that's out there in the world, but what they've been able to do is leverage their brand to really penetrate the market, because this is, rather than a startup, this is a 60-year-old company with a strong brand in technology markets for never retiring a product, right? There's a reliability to it. So they've managed to use everything that's true about analog over its proud history, but they've added these new things, these new business models, new services to what they do. So that's really been a tremendous experience. And we tell the story of how they learned to do this using this ideate, incubate, scale approach. And we tell the story in the book.
Andy, it's been really enjoyable speaking with you today. If people want to find out more about the book, about Change Logic, and about you and the work that you do, what's the best place they can go to find out more?
thecorporateexplorer.com and changelogic.com, all one word.
Perfect. I'll make sure to get those links down in the description below.
Thank you.
Andy, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Thanks very much, Nick. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders, and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they're backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.